I'm very interested in the work of your organization, but I'd ask you to start back even further with your own personal history and tell me a little bit about your childhood, some of your earliest memories, what kind of family you were from, those kind of things.
So I'm looking that way. Well, my name is Sandra Ramos. I'm Nicaraguan. I was born in the city of Managua. Well, about my childhood, what I can remember is that it was a childhood very similar to that of all the children in this country who grow up only with a mother, who is mother and father at the same time. My mother is a working woman. She worked at the Mercado Oriental. She had a shop there so she could support 8 girls. We were 8 sisters. We are 8 sisters. I am in the middle. I'm the one in the middle, right in the middle of my sisters. So my life was normal. As normal as it is for poor children in this country who have to work with their mothers in order to be able to access the basic necessities of life. I think if there is anything at this point I can remember and have as a fixed memory in my mind is that I come from that in my life, the strongest images and figures are those of my grandmother and my mother. I think their example really marked my life. What I mean is that they are women who worked hard. They were always fair women, women with a very large heart, and they are women who marked my life because despite of their poverty, despite their limitations, they always shared what little they had with the people around them. This is an example that I have in my memory and in my life, and their example marked in me a way to practice my life to the point that I cannot eat alone. When I eat, it's always me and someone else, or me and 3 others, or me and 4 others, right? My mother's example as a working woman and a strong woman also marked my life, and that is the sector of women with whom I work. They are women who, when I talk to them, I also remember my own childhood, and I remember my mother's struggle to get ahead and to improve the life conditions of her 8 daughters. So I don't know what else to tell you. I studied. I finished primary and secondary school. I went to the university. Of all my sisters, I am the only one who survived to that model. None of my other sisters were able to finish college. Almost all of them did go, the oldest only did primary school.
Why were you different?
Because the conditions were different. They entered the labor force from a very young age because we all had to work alongside with my mother. My other younger sisters lived different conditions. These conditions changed, and my mother was able to send her daughters not only to secondary school, not only to primary school, but also to secondary school and vocationary school. But they did not go beyond that. They did not go beyond that because at the end of my 2 groups of sisters, the older ones and the younger ones, I think because of the traditional role that we women have been brought up with, it's like life finally arrives when, or rather, our life is over when we marry and we take care of a man, because we are the ones who take care of the man. It's not that the man takes care of us. And when we have kids, well, that turns into a limitation for women to get ahead. It may have also been genetics, right? Possibly because of my genes, because my father is not the same man who is the father of my older sisters, nor the man who is the father of my younger sisters. But also my rebellious attitude. I was always a rebel. I think from the moment I was born, I was rebellious. But also possibly because of the competition I had, because I was the middle child. So the ones behind me pushed, and the ones before me pushed, and so possibly that made me somewhat of a survivor, because I really fought to graduate. I really fought to go to college. I fought to become a professional, even having my son. Even as I was mother, father to one of my sons, I kept on studying. Then I got married. I married and I had my second son, and I stayed in school. I had a fixed goal in my life, and it was that I did not want to follow the same path or the same lifestyle as my sisters. Yeah.
Can you tell me when you first became involved in the work you're doing now in a centralized way? What was the process?
Well, look, I lived in what is now known, in what was then known as the La Bolsa neighborhood. This is the neighborhood behind the cathedral. And that was the center of Managua, right? So we lived near there. My mother rented a place there, and I started to become involved because that area was a key area. The students were constantly taking over the cathedral, and the university students, the high school students, it was like protest central.
What years were these?
We're talking about the 70s, 60 something, because I was born in 59. From the time I was very young, I have been exposed to the protests. So that is something that marked me, right? But also because every day I had to walk past the cathedral and past the palace, which is right here, very close by, in order to get to the central market where my mother worked. So on this route, I would bump into all the protests. I would bump into the students' movement struggle, and I would observe them. I mean, well, my eyes could see that, right? Maybe I didn't understand it at all as young as I was, but I would follow that route to the point that my mother says that that one time a becat drove by. That's what they call the police patrols that were from the EVI, the specialized group of the Somoza Guard. And I saw them pass, and I grabbed a rock and I threw it at them. Ask me, why did I do that? I don't know. But I threw that rock at them because everyone used to say that they were bad. And my mother had the fright of her life because she said that the becat stopped. And they said, hey, who's the son of a bitch who threw that rock? And it was me. And my mother she was very concerned. She even smacked me in the head that day. But I was just a little girl. I was in primary school back then. So you see, my life took place within that sector because I studied in the Josefa Toledo de Aire School. which was close to my house. And then in secondary school, I went to the Andres Bello School, which was also very close to my house. So back then, really, that whole perimeter was like a vicious circle full of revolutionaries. And I remember that I would beg my mother to let me go to school because, for my mother, because of the culture and her being a businesswoman, small business owner herself, what they now call small business owners. Well, she considered that we should all be small business women, that it was not necessary to study so much, because she had not had that many years of schooling, and she was supporting her family, and that was the way to do it. I remember that I would beg her to let me go to school. And sometimes she would say, no, you're not going today. And I would cry and cry and cry and cry because I really wanted to go to school. Or sometimes I remember there would be strikes and demonstrations at the school, and I would go. And I would tell my mother, yeah, we have class today, but there were no classes. We were on strike. And when I turned around, my mother had me by the hand and was asking, what are you doing? But those were my surroundings, and it seems that they really marked my life. So then when I went to college, well, it happened the same. I was already going to UNAM in Managua, and all the heavily involved people from the Sandinista Front were all at UNAM Managua campus. The student movement was there, and there were lots of people, and we would protest, go on strike. We would protest all the time. I don't think we went to that many classes because I was always out protesting. So that's how I was making connections and connections and connections until I was involved. I became completely involved with the Sandinista Front, extremely involved. And then came the revolution, and I went to work for what is known as the Nicaraguan Film Institute, by chance, really. And that's where I began to learn about the workers' unions. That the government had ordered the creation of the unions because we needed to organize the society, the entire society. So the workers and unions, the youth as youth groups, the teachers and teachers groups, and all that got all set up. So in this case, I became one of the union activists at my job. I became involved with the Sandinista Workers Center. And I'm a founder of the Sandinista Workers Center, the CST. I am one of their founding members. And then I started to take on responsibilities. I think taking on responsibilities happens gradually, little by little, bit by bit. It's a process, right? Yeah, nobody's born with open eyes. Today I'm going to be a guerrilla fighter. And tomorrow I'm going to be something else. No, it's a process that you take on, and it becomes a life process. An analysis of life. When you see the struggles that other women and men have, and you want to help them overcome those struggles. But I do think that for me, two great women in my life influenced me. My grandmother and my mother. My grandmother and my mother as these great, persevering women. The men in my life have no weight in my history. Not in my historic memory. Here in one's own hard drive, I cannot find strong men in my family. I find strong women, determined women, who were able to raise their daughters as best they could, their very own lives. So that's how I became involved. I was in the Atlantic coast as a result of that involvement. I was in the Atlantic coast in the north, in the northern region, for almost 4 years. I was there supporting the organization, supporting the indigenous communities. And then I came back because I wanted to continue with my studies. I had not finished college, and I continued my studies until I graduated. And I kept working with the unions until 1994 because I had a falling out with the leadership of the union movement. It was falling out over their agenda. We made great strides around feminism, around gender struggles. We insisted that the working class was not just one class. It was because it's not asexual. Men and women form the working class, and we have, though they insist on us, on our demands over class, but in the case of women, we have another demand, not just our salary, not just collective bargaining, not just the right to organize, but the right to a life free of violence, free of sexual harassment in the workplace, the issue of maternity, right? The issue of sexual and reproductive health. I mean, that's to say that for women, there's a whole other world. But the workers' movement in those times wasn't prepared for these matters. It's like women advanced and they stayed behind, backwards. And there was a point where they believed that what we were doing was weakening the working class of our country, that we were diverting the working class from its historic mission which is the struggle between capitalism and proletariat. But they didn't understand that within that struggle, there is another hidden struggle, which is also important, and that's the women's struggle. So our brandishing the flag for the women's struggle led to a very, 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 very strong rupture within the Sandinista union workers movement, in this case in particular with the Sandinista Workers Center, to the point that we decided to leave that space. But the thing is that it was such a violent rupture that the union leaders decided that the women needed to be taught a lesson. So they accused us, the women who had done this. This was in 1993 or 1994. We were accused of a crime, and the crime they accused us was of stealing from them. The leaders accused us of stealing sophisticated technological equipment, the air conditioning units, the desks. Seems like we stole everything. Seems everything but the men. Other than that, we took everything. This was an organization that had security personnel, men with guns, who said that we came at night under the guise of darkness with a truck in the middle of the night, and that we, right in front of those security guards, because they went to trial and testified and said that they had seen us with their very own eyes. Well, if you saw me, why didn't you stop me? So they said that one.
What organization were you working with at the time?
At the Sandinista Workers Central with the unions. So that was the rupture. Then we left. We left the organization and they took us to trial. Personally, there was an arrest warrant issued against me, issued by a judge who was also a member of the National Security Force at the time. We had arrest warrants, but I did not let them arrest me. So I had to go on the run for a year. I was on the run throughout the country for a whole year because they were determined to make an example out of me. That the ones who decide that the ones who decided how women were to leave the movement were them, the male leaders. Since we had decided to leave them.
What year was it that you had to leave?
In 1994, I spent the entire year on the run. Then in 95, and thanks to, actually in 94, thanks to the Austrian embassy, the ambassador called for us and offered us two things back then. Political asylum, and I just laughed. What? How is it that I am going to seek asylum from my own country because of these assholes? No, it's not possible. I am not leaving my country. How can that be? If I'm a woman who has struggled all her life in this country, how can I leave? So we told them that if they wanted to help us, that they could help by paying a lawyer. And they paid for the legal services for our defense. And in 1995, we won the case. We won the case against all those big shots who were protected by everyone because they were high-level leaders. So we won the case. And well, you see, the María Elena Cuadra was organized on May 7th, 1994. And on May 9th, by May 9th, we already had arrest warrants. So just 2 days after organizing the María Elena Cuadra, there was an arrest warrant issued against me. So, this reflects, what happened to us reflects the patriarchal power that just as today we see in the acts of violence against women, when women decide to leave their husbands, the husbands believe that they are the ones who decide how and when the relationship will end. How, when, and where. They are the ones who are supposed to leave us, because when we leave them, we hurt their pride, their self-love, their macho love, and that's when they decide to hurt the women, right? Sometimes to the point of killing them.
What was your role in establishing María Elena?
Well, I'm one of the founders of the María Elena Cuadra, one of the main founders of that organization. I, along with two other people, who came up with the idea of how we were going to reorganize. But really, it was more like a collective convocation among all of us. Okay, now so what? What are we going to do now? Okay, we don't belong to them anymore, but are we going to stay like that? So we made a lot of phone calls. We established a meeting place, and we met, and we decided to found an organization. 800 hardworking women leaders got together, and we organized the women's movement known today as the María Elena Cuadra. And we organized it in 6 different departments within the country. We were born in a way in which, like when women give birth to multiple children, usually an organization starts simple and then it gets complicated, right? It usually starts in Managua and then it grows. Not us. We were born in 6 different departments simultaneously.
And how did you name the organization?
Well, the day we organized on May 7th, that we had the large assembly meeting, everyone suggested a name. What will we call ourselves? So there were some that wanted us to call ourselves Virgin of Guadalupe, or that we call ourselves this or that. Well, there were a large number of names. I proposed the name María Elena Cuadra because she was a woman leader of MLibrary, the Luis Amanda Espinosa Association of Nicaraguan Women, and a person we know. She was a leader of the department of Carazo from Diriomo, and we knew of the love she had for women and her unconditional support, her strong work. And well, we proposed that name. Well, I proposed it and the assembly approved it. But also because she was a woman leader who had died just 1 month before organizing the María Elena Cuadra. So she had been a member of her organization, and we decided to recognize her work by naming our organization in her honor. But aside from that, we came to an agreement, a moral agreement, that we should not go on recognizing women's ability and dedication once they have passed. Because she didn't even realize that we all loved her so much. So we decided that we must honor women in life, not when they have passed away, because they won't even be able to see it. They won't be able to see how the rest of the women see her as such a valuable part of the struggle for women's rights.
Tell me about some of the strategies that you were
Can you tell me about some of the strategies that you were first using to organize women when the organization started?
Well, initially we decided to call ourselves Women Movement of Working and Unemployed Women María Elena Cuadra. Why working? Because we are all workers. That is to say that all the informal work, the unpaid work, the paid work, the concept of workers is to rescue ourselves as active subjects, as subjects with rights, and unemployed because we were going through a crisis in which, women were losing jobs, and we wanted to incorporate the women who did not have work, either because they couldn't find work or because they were young women looking for work. So we decided to claim those two fronts. So the first strategies were about making visible the contribution of women that women make to the nation's economy as subjects with rights. We began the work by organizing the working women of the Zona Franca because there was a very large number of women there whose rights were being violated. Back then, there was no union organizing inside those companies, and frankly, the unions weren't even interested in organizing women. So we go in and start to organize the women to support them in the struggle for their rights. And then the union movement showed up and decided that it was also going to organize women. So that was the first front that we worked on. We also worked with women who were domestic workers, with women who were small farmers, helping them to diversify their crops, and providing them with workshops on gender, self-esteem, human rights, labor rights, providing them with technical assistance to improve the yield of their crops. So we started off strong, everything that had to do with gender analysis. Today, the María Elena Cuadra is a strong organization, active in 6 departments of the country, and we think we have a 16-year work history, and that all that work is not just the work of one leader. There is not a single leadership. Each one of us has been in the company of a large group of other women leaders. In the barrios, in the communities, in the workplace, our leadership is not our own personal. It is a collective leadership. My leadership represents a collective because I am what I am because other women have worked with me. It's not just me and myself. No, my leadership and recognition that I have and that this organization has is because of the leadership of the thousands of women who participate actively in this organization, right? So my leadership is a collective leadership. I am what I am because other women work with me.
Have you ever had to change the strategies that you use to adjust to different political climates or historical moments?
No. Our strategies have not changed. Our mission, our vision, and to say our strategies have remained the same, and that is the defense of women's rights. The methodology, perhaps, is what has changed. We began this with a strategy of not denouncing when rights were being violated, but rather to accumulate strength by educating women, educating them to take ownership of their own rights. Because it does not help that I go out there and report and denounce that someone's rights are being violated if the rest of the women do not want to. So we started this process by convincing the women to recognize themselves and to empower themselves to claim their own rights, so that once a large group of women is convinced and has appropriated those rights as their own, then the collective action is stronger, right? That is why we started working from the simple things to the complex things in our work in the free trade zones. Today we are respected. We are a respected organization in the free trade zones because we have also contributed to the education of the business owners to respect our laws. And in our education endeavor, we have incorporated what the law in our country says. And when business owners do not uphold the law, we take them to court. But this has been a process in the last 16 years of work. Possibly, if 16 years ago someone would tell me that I would seize a company, I would say, oh dear Lord, how am I going to seize a company? What? How? When? Where? Well, for not upholding the workers' rights. Today, if a company violates the workers' rights, we seize them. But this is because within that company, there are now workers, men and women, who are cognizant of their rights. If the people are not cognizant, they think that what we are doing is crazy.
Will you tell me a little bit about some of the conditions that women are facing in these free trade zones? What are the issues that women need your help with?
Well, like in all places, I mean, even in the United States and everywhere, business owners always try to violate the laws of the men and women who work for them. So here, there is no model businessman, there is no model business, there is no model investor. They all come to this country looking to accumulate wealth. That is why they have moved from the countries in the north to the countries in the south, looking for cheap labor and a place where they can get away with not obeying labor rights. And that is why our organization is so important, because we know whom we are dealing with. We know that there are people whose mentality is based on wealth accumulation only, and not based on accumulating wealth, but distributing the benefits. This is to say that it is a capitalist model that strives to accumulate, and not redistribute. Therefore, I think our organization has a reason for being, because until now, the model is not redistributive. The economic model that we have and is used in the free trade zones is a model that tramples on workers' rights, that makes women sick, that does not have the best work conditions, and that still does not offer equal pay to women.
Can you explain the conditions? Can you give me some examples of what women are facing?
Well, for example, in the first years, I'm talking about, about 10 years ago. We still struggled a lot in the Zona Franca with the matter of physical violence against women. The Zona Franca is, it isn't composed of one single source of capital. I mean, there are Taiwanese, Koreans, Americans, now there's Mexican, now there's a Guatemalan, Honduran. We don't work with one single investor. So initially, the first ones we approached to eliminate physical violence in the workplace were because 17 years ago, and everybody knows this, and it's been documented, that the Asians would hit our women. And so we felt that there was no place for that. So that was the first thing we were able to prove. Then also the low salaries just hadn't changed at all. So we tackled this. We tackled the fact that men and women were not allowed to organize into unions, They weren't allowed time to go for medical appointments. And also the pregnancy tests to which women were subject in order to work there. On top of all that, of course, you had to be thin, young, and pretty to work in those businesses.
Why?
Well, because the Asians had their model, their employee model. And since this country has so few employment resources, right? Because it was just recently ending an internal war, and it had recently ended an aggressive war in which the North American government had not been able to was not able to compensate this country for that war. Although there was a resolution from the International Court of Justice that it should financially compensate the damages to this country, it was just very difficult to get this country's economy going. When the Frente Sandinista loses the elections, well, then the new government, which was a right-wing government, which is to say that they see things different, right? They see the economy different. They decided to privatize every single business that at the time belonged to the state. So it was just enormous quantities of people who became unemployed. And to this day, even to this day, that decision to end with the national industries is still the largest nightmare that we women have in this country. Because you see, when they dismantled the national industries, all that was left here was to bring in foreign investment. And the first foreign investment to come to our country was looking for one thing: cheap labor, right? Terrible pay, bad working conditions, and also you had to remember that the infrastructure that was there was so obsolete that when these new industries came in and occupied those buildings, the people were crowded together. Today, thanks to the struggle of all the women workers, because it's the struggle, their struggle that leads to results. Today, the new companies that come here they have better environmental conditions. And the owners of those industrial parks are required to prove good conditions. So yeah, you might work in what seems like a box, but that box should be appropriate in good condition. But there are still problems. They haven't ended. They'll never end while we have this model of production focused on accumulating wealth and not redistributing it. We'll still be fighting over the same thing, to have our rights respected. It's a struggle, and well, I mean, it's proven that since the 19th century, when capitalism emerged strongly, we've been fighting for the same thing. It's a never-ending struggle. It's not going to end, and what we do and try to work on is for the coming generations of women laborers to enter this struggle in better conditions, with more equality, with more equity. Not like today, where there are so many young women who are not cognizant. They weren't cognizant of their rights. So we want the new generations to know what their rights are and to demand them, regardless of who is governing the country. And any company that comes to this country comes respecting those human rights that our government has ratified.
You've mentioned the factories are better now, but
what are the current issues that women face?
Well, I've already talked that the struggles are the same, that they are the same struggles. They are the same struggles that I've talked about, but now in another context. For example, now the Sandinista government, today there are more unions with the maquilas because the businessmen, well, the Sandinista government has worked so that those workers be allowed to unionize, so that many businessmen now accept the Sandinista unions. Because I insist that everything that happens in this country is the responsibility of the state, is the responsibility of the big investors, and is the responsibility of the big brands. There are three entities that are responsible for everything that happens here. Therefore, if we have a government that is more protective of investors than of its own citizens, it will allow for their rights to be violated. But if we have a state that is more of a benefactor of its workers, more benefactor, I didn't say that it is a benefactor, but more of a benefactor, a little more of a benefactor, and is able to combine the rights with investment, well, that helps to reduce the problems. So we still have the same problems, but it's no longer in those big dimensions. It's that wherever you would go, you would hear about problems of workers' rights being violated. So we still have that today, but there are more possibilities to report them and specific ways to demand that those rights be respected.
The big question that folks from outside, from the north, ask is, are these factories, these free trade zones, are they exploitation or are they empowerment for women?
Bueno, la gran pregunta que los de afuera tienen es si esas zonas francas son de explotación o de empoderamiento.
To me, they are exploitation. There's no way around it. Everything else is just a lie. Everyone wants to say that since there are no jobs in Nicaragua, well, the Zona Franca helps resolve that, and therefore it's empowering. Sorry, I don't know who is making that analysis, but whoever is doing that analysis needs to go back to school, needs to learn about sociology, about anthropology, about psychology, about economy, and do a more integral analysis. I don't think it's empowerment when women are left crippled with lung problems. I don't think it's empowerment when the working conditions of such a repetitive work leave long-term muscular skeletal effects in the women, and that nobody will give that diagnosis in this country. No, I don't think it's empowerment to have a production model that won't even allow the workers to continue their studies when the young women form the largest group of women laborers. So that cannot be empowerment. What the maquilas are for in this country is a Band-Aid for the huge unemployment in our country. I cannot see that they have any other role. I won't give it to them. It would be empowerment. They would be empowering women if they abided by the codes of conduct, if they fully obeyed the law, if they created decent working conditions for Nicaraguan women. That's to say, if they were just redistributive. How can they empower me? How can I say that they are empowering me if they don't reciprocate? If an economy is not redistributive, it's only about taking, work for me, work for me, work for me, here's your 3 pesos, work for me, work for me, work for me, here's your 3 pesos. That's not empowerment. That's a Band-Aid.
You've already
touched on this, but I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, to say more about the impact of globalization or neoliberal policies for women in particular.
But that's been studied so much. It's been studied in detail, and it's been diagnosed in detail that what neoliberal policies have done is to put more weight on the shoulders of women. It's the neoliberal policies that have sunk this country into huge poverty, and we still haven't been able to get out of it. So I don't know what else I can tell you. So for me, the neoliberal policies have gotten the whole of humanity into the chaos we are in.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit and ask you about the role that feminism may have played in your work, if at all. How do you understand or define feminism?
Well, when I worked in the unions, before beginning my work with women, I thought the working class was all one class, that it was a sole working class. I was a woman, but in my mind, the working class was the working class. when I became involved in the feminist movement in this country, and we began the debates and the analyses, because this is a process. Nobody's born feminist, and nobody's born knowing about gender. This is learned as we go, right? So in this learning process, when they named me to lead the women's office of the Sandinista Workers Central, I said to myself, what is this? What am I going to do here, right? What is this? What am I going to do? Well, the first thing I did was to go talk to the feminists in the country so they would teach me. Lai taught me one part, another part I learned on my own, and the ties with the women. Well, I started to see that the everyday problems that women have, to the point that I became very aware, deeply aware of it, and took it to heart. And the feminist movement in this country has contributed so much. The feminist movement in this country has contributed greatly to the Nicaraguan women. Possibly the only criticism that I may have, but that also depends on how one takes on feminism and what one wants feminism to be. That's one, because for me, what we are doing here is providing workshops for women workers, for the female leaders in the barrios, for the female leaders in the workplaces, so that they learn about feminism. And that feminism is not a single feminism, that there are multiple feminisms, and that once you tell them these are the multiple feminisms, the various theories, pick the one you like the most. But why? To avoid that reaction, oh, there comes the monkey, which is what men do. They say, don't get involved with the feminists because they will divert you. That's what those women will do to you. So I'm just so tired of hearing that. So yes, I'm tired of it. And I recognize in feminist theory, I recognize that it has the potential to transform women's lives. And it's a way of seeing the economy differently, seeing life differently. So I have to transfer that to my women, because why should I want to know this and die and take this knowledge with me to the grave? No. So we believe, and I personally believe, along with all the women I work with, we believe that we have to transfer everything that we know about feminism to the new generation of women. Why? Because when we brandish the feminist philosophy, we were so discredited. They would say, here comes the lesbians, the divisors, the one who don't like men, the ones who are going to ruin and taint what it means to be a woman. It was so horrible. And so women wouldn't come near us. We suffered discrimination, but we told ourselves, well, we're not going to die because of this discrimination, but we have to teach the women. We have to teach them to understand that men are not inherently right, and that what we are doing now, and that's what we're doing now, have a leadership academy, and we are preparing young female leaders from other organizations. We have joined with other organizations to form new leaders who know the ABCs of their human rights, but also have a knowledge of what feminism is, because in the mixed sectors they say to keep us divided, and so women don't demand more respect, they tell us that if we take on feminism, then we are deviating the organization towards something that should not be deviated to. And that's why that's why they're so defensive. And I live feminism. I live it as a part of my life. That's to say that everything I do, I know it has to do with feminism. It's not just a theory up there on the air. Rather, it's a way of living life, of thinking and of working for other women to know and appropriate themselves and make changes in their life. As I see it, that is feminism. There is no other. I don't need to declare myself a feminist, because that's what they used to say. If you don't declare yourself a feminist, you're not one. So I say, on the one side, men discriminate us, and this other one here says that if I don't write a testament saying that I'm a feminist or put on a sign, that they won't see me as a feminist, but that's what I do. What I do is part of feminism. So yes, I think the feminist movement has progressed in this country in the way we see ourselves, and the way we see ourselves, of seeing ourselves as equals. I think the contributions of the feminist movement in this country are indisputable, and I'm not just talking of the Nicaraguan feminists, but of the global feminist movement that has contributed so much to us. And well, we have taken that feminist philosophy as a way of making change in this patriarchal structure that oppresses us and keeps us sunken in this poverty. This is not the result of neoliberalism. For both neoliberalism and the patriarchal system are responsible, both of them together, for continuing to oppress women, to oppress more than the 50 plus 1% of the world's population.
We talked about this a little bit
when we first arrived, but can you tell me about, in your opinion, the relationship between scholarship or academic work and activist work that you're doing?
Mencionamos al inicio, pero si nos puede contar o compartir tu opinión acerca del trabajo académico y el activismo en tu trabajo.
Well, look, we work closely with academia. We currently have a program with the Universidad Centroamericana, with the UCA's Gender Studies program, so that when our leaders graduate from our academy, from our leadership academy, we send them to an advanced program at the university. So we work along with the universities, and the ones who teach our leaders here in our academy are academics, are women from academia. So for us, there should be a synergy is necessary between academia and empirical knowledge. And these two must join forces in order to improve the work that we do. So for me, it is valid, all the academic studies, because we conduct studies here and we contact people in academia to do them. So that's why I think that's why all the academic studies that have taken place in this country have our support, because we have very close ties. So to make that link between what is formal academia and our women, I think that academia has learned a lot too, and so have we. I think it's been both ways, and I think it's important. Theory and practice should go hand in hand, and I think that at one point in our history, academia was there and practice was over here, right? So we would criticize the poor academics and they would criticize us. Oh, these women are all activism, and they don't think. But then when we began to work together, the two pillars, we saw that if the two pillars come together, we can do better things for women. And following on that thought, the daily routine of women needs to be written down, because while we are heavily involved in activism, we are actively struggling day in and day out for women's rights. It's important for someone to write it down and compile this history. It's the women who engage in the struggle for women. No one else will do it. The men are not interested. But I haven't seen a male author or Paulo Coelho, or I don't know who, is saying how pretty, how beautiful women, feminist women are. So, okay, they make some tiny reference, but to really rescue the story of women's lives has always been the work of women in academia or film, who are always behind us trying to make visible this effort, which I believe is very, very, very important for future generations. Because just like other feminists in other times did what they did and fought for our right to vote, for our right to citizenship, for a name, for a last name, so then all these processes have to be taught to women. I agree with this, and to women who come in the next and continue to struggle. That's why we're so thankful of what you are doing now, that you explain the project and its objectives. It seems that it is, it's a pertinent project, and we thank you. We thank you for doing it.
You've described the reality that there's often a difference between the
You've
law
described
and
the
then
reality
what women
that there's
actually
often a difference
experience.
between the law and then what women actually experience.
Ha describido la realidad de que hay una gran diferencia entre la ley y lo que realmente pasa a las mujeres.
Can you give me examples when women's
Can you give me
organizations
examples
have
of
been
when
necessary
women's
to make
organizations
advances in
have been
women's health?
necessary to make advances in women's
De,
health?
de cuando es necesario que una organización haga un avance en la salud de la mujer.
Well, as you probably know already, we used to have the right to therapeutic abortion.
The right for therapeutic abortion.
And that right,
And this right,
unfortunately, and due to a certain political class in this country, because it was not just the work of one single party, but a political class that joined forces with the ecclesiastical authorities
the hierarchy,
to take that right away that had been ours for over 100 years. I sometimes start thinking 100 years ago, society was more conservative. And I think of all the hard work that the feminists back then did in order for us to have the right to therapeutic abortions in those difficult conditions. And nonetheless, all the power of the ecclesiastical authorities and all the power of the political parties turned against us. However, we are not just sitting with our arms crossed, and there are women's organizations that are intimately linked to the defense of women's health and our sexual and reproductive rights, and they continue to struggle every day to rescue the right to therapeutic abortions. Also, to assist our women with any problems they might have as a result of that prohibition. For example, the National Assembly is discussing what is known as the law on health and on sexual and reproductive health. Sexual and reproductive health. It says nothing about rights. Nothing about rights. It says sexual and reproductive health. But we are there, we feminist women, we're there trying to get that tiny little concept in, trying to find room for that little concept, because we know that we are up against a huge economic power, because the church is not only an ideological power, but it is also an economic power. So much that in order to take that right away, it had at its service all the owners of the media, so that the publicity that was shown was extremely cruel to women. It was cruel, and we didn't have enough funds to create a counter campaign. We just couldn't. It was such a monster. The church, with all its economic, patriarchal, ideological power, along with the political parties, and on the other side, the women's groups. It was like David and Goliath. So today, we are still working on all the processes of reporting, condemning, and suing for the restitution of the right to therapeutic abortions. Our organizations continue to work to promote a life free of violence. This is another front on which the feminist movement has fought to make visible that pandemic, that tragedy that women continue to live, because we still do not have a state that is, to this day, we do not have a state that is a protector of women, that strives to save the lives of women and allows us to live a life free of violence. Today, we are also working on a law against violence towards women, including all the feminicides, and that law was introduced by 21 women's organizations, including the María Elena Cuadra women's movement, and it is now being decided on. We know that the law in of itself would not resolve everything, but before we didn't even have a judicial framework that would recognize feminicide or femicide. Today we can now talk of femicide and feminicide as punishable crimes. I think that it is a great contribution of my country's feminist movement and of the women's movement that we can now count on a law, that we will be able to count on a law that will save women's lives. Although the struggle later will be to implement the law due to all the influences that we'll have to address to avoid inequality, because there is inequality, and there is also there's inequality, and there's also tolerance towards these acts of violence. But this law also addresses sanctions to government employees who do not aggressively act
You
against the
also
wave of
mentioned that
violence against
the
women.
María Elena Cuadra movement has addressed some health issues in the free trade zones. Can you tell us about what health issues you've worked on there?
Well, in the first place, we have worked so much and we have pressured the Department of Labor to issue a ministerial resolution prohibiting pregnancy tests in order to apply to jobs. Yeah. We have also worked with the unions and the private sector on what is known as the law on labor health in the maquilas. There's a special law to demand better health conditions for workers, men and women, in the maquilas. We have looked into the provisional medical clinics to ensure that they are treating women well. We've done studies regarding issues of sexual and reproductive health. We have a team of health promoters who continuously educate women on their sexual and reproductive rights, on sexually transmitted diseases, and on the use of birth control, because they are very, very young women, and they need to protect themselves, their health, and their lives. To think about things that if they are struggling with one child, well, it will be even harder with three. Besides, the salaries in the Zona Franca do not really allow you to live a decent life. So we also need our young women to learn to plan. We also have a program to educate male and female workers on the consequences of HIV/AIDS, on how to protect themselves. But we also have a resolution that forbids the companies from requiring an HIV test in order to apply for a job. I think we've been advanced little by little, although we still have large challenges, as are the long-term effects of the health of the workers that are caused by the repetitive movement, which is still something we have to work. We have to work on. But we have also worked on matters regarding pregnant women and their need for time off for prenatal care. It used to be that when the women started to show, they would be immediately fired. It's not that they don't still get fired now, but it happens in a less abusive way. And also, there is a little more protection for the state of the state of a pregnant woman. A little more protection, not the best, but a little bit more.